So what actually happens when the very laws that are, you know, designed to protect us or heal us suddenly get perceived as literal weapons of destruction?
It's a terrifying thought, honestly.
It really is. I mean, how do you even defend yourself when the main allegation against you is that your own mind can't be trusted anymore? Welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. We are unpacking a massive stack of sources today, and they offer this really deeply personal, unfiltered look into a total crisis of survival.
Yeah, we're analyzing a raw collection of WhatsApp chat logs today. These belong to a man named Khan Zakir.
Right, and the context surrounding these chat logs is just, it's absolutely critical to understanding the intensity of what we're looking at here.
Oh, entirely.
Uh,
Because Zakir is currently navigating this brutal, highly contested separation from his wife.
and a custody battle, too, right?
Exactly. A very bitter custody battle over their two young children, Zainab and Zar. And simultaneously, he is facing total, paralyzing financial ruin.
But the true core of our deep dive today isn't just, the anatomy of a messy divorce. It's a detailed exploration of how Zakir is interpreting a very formal, very real piece of legislation.
Yes, the Sin Mental Health Act of 2013.
Right. So the mission for us today is to take the formal criteria of these mental health laws and overlay them onto Zakir's informal, personal nightmare.
We're going to apply the specific legal statutes from the text of the act directly to his situation.
Yeah, we'll outline the mechanics of the involuntary detention he genuinely believes he's facing. We'll explain the medical verifications the state requires and discuss the profound emotional impact of feeling just completely isolated while staring down the ultimate loss of your personal autonomy.
But before we really start applying these legal statutes, we need to establish the parameters of our analysis today.
Right, that's a good point to make.
We are going to examine Zakir's claims objectively, based on the text provided in the sources. However, it is vital for you, listening, to understand that we are examining the perception of these laws.
The perception through his lived experience.
Exactly, through Zakir's lived experience. We are not taking sides in the underlying familial dispute here.
No, absolutely not. Nor are we making a clinical diagnosis of anyone involved.
Right. We are acting as impartial guides, exploring the mechanisms of the law and how a person in extreme distress reads, reacts to, and, well, attempts to survive the legal framework surrounding them.
It really requires a total shift in perspective.
Yeah.
Because reading these informal chats, you watch a standard legal document mutate into a horror script in real time.
You really do.
So let's step into what we're calling the informal battlefield. Let's look at Zakir's day-to-day reality as he's documented it in his messages to his friends, his extended family, and his estranged wife.
Who, it's worth noting, he has saved in his phone under the name So Beautiful or Sindhu.
Right, yeah. Which adds this whole other layer of emotional weight to it all. So to understand how Zakir processes the law, we first have to understand his cognitive load right now.
And that load is immense. He is dealing with compounding simultaneous stressors that would fracture anyone's baseline resilience, honestly.
I mean, in his messages, he explicitly lists these challenges out.
Yeah, he recently lost his job, severing his primary source of income.
He's physically separated from his partner.
And he's acting as the primary caregiver for his two young children. Plus, the chats reveal that his son, Zar, is actively suffering from chickenpox.
Yeah, that specific detail about the chickenpox is so important.
It really is.
Because it adds an acute, immediate medical stressor to an already volatile situation. Like, caregiving for a sick child requires absolute hypervigilance, and he's doing it without a safety net.
Furthermore, he is managing the decline of his mother's health.
Oh, right, the potential Alzheimer's.
Exactly. He notes symptoms in the chats that he attributes to Alzheimer's disease. So the responsibility of elder care is layered directly right on top of childcare and unemployment.
It's just a mountain of stress. And this brings us to the financial reality he's operating within. He is entirely destitute. The sources show him reaching out to contacts named Faizan, Asim, and someone saved as Co-Gold. And he isn't asking for, big legal retainers.
No, he's asking to borrow microscopic sums just to keep the lights on.
Yeah. He asks for 3,000 rupees here, 5,000 rupees there. At one point, he's literally asking a friend to convert $10 worth of cryptocurrency so he can manage his daily survival. $10.
And he attributes this destitution to a deliberate, coordinated strategy.
A trap, essentially.
Right. Zakir claims his siblings have turned against him, legally maneuvering to take his mother's power of attorney.
which gives them all the control.
Yes. He alleges they are holding all of her jewelry and cash and actively cutting off his access to familial resources. He uses the word choking.
Choking, yeah, that's a very evocative word.
He believes they are choking his resources to force him to abandon his home and, by extension, his children.
When you look at the emotional texture of these messages, the isolation is just absolute. He tells his friend Faizan that he has been managing and dodging an unprecedented number of threats and traps.
He really perceives everyone in his immediate orbit.
His brothers, his sisters, his in-laws.
Right, everyone. He sees them all as agents of a unified conspiracy.
And this brings us to a highly complex dynamic between Zakir and his estranged wife, Sindhu.
The text exchanges between Zakir and Sindhu, they offer a masterclass in subjective interpretation.
They really do. It's fascinating to read.
Because she repeatedly sends messages expressing a desire for his well-being.
Yeah, she texts phrases like, I just want you to be stable and healthy.
Exactly. She suggests he consult a psychiatrist, framing this medical intervention as a necessary step for his own good.
For the future stability of their children, right?
Yes, and for establishing a foundation for what she calls healthy co-parenting.
So if you strip away the context, her words read as standard, mature concern.
Absolutely.
It looks exactly like the language of a partner trying to navigate a difficult separation responsibly.
But Zakir fiercely rejects this framing.
Oh, completely. He doesn't just ignore her advice. He labels her behavior explicitly in the chats as weaponized concern.
Which is such a powerful phrase, weaponized concern.
He believes that her suggestions to see a psychiatrist and his family echoing those exact same suggestions are entirely divorced from empathy.
He interprets them as the foundational groundwork of a coordinated legal attack.
Right. He sees her texts not as offers of help, but as a paper trail being carefully constructed for a judge.
So when she texts, I want you to be stable, he reads, I am documenting your instability.
It operates like a psychological Trojan horse. Like, imagine you were in Zakir's position for a second. On the outside, the message, you should really talk to a professional, looks like a gift of care.
Right, a totally normal thing to say.
But Zakir is convinced that hidden inside that suggestion is a literal army waiting to dismantle his life, declare him an incompetent father, and legally strip him of his custody and property.
It's terrifying when you view it from that angle.
It is. So what does it actually do to the human brain when it can no longer trust an offer of help?
Well, psychologically, it forces the brain into a state of chronic hyperarousal.
Fight or flight.
Exactly. Zakir actually uses that clinical language to describe his own state, telling his wife, I have been in a fight or flight mode for months.
Wow.
And from a neurological standpoint, when a person is in prolonged fight or flight, the amygdala...
Which is the brain's threat detection center, right?
Right. The amygdala basically hijacks the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for rational analysis and nuance.
It shuts down the logic center.
Yes. And because his isolation is so profound, he has no external voices to calibrate his reality.
He's in an echo chamber of his own panic.
So when a text message arrives from his sister or his ex-wife expressing concern, his amygdala doesn't process it as a social olive branch.
No.
It maps it instantly as an incoming projectile.
Which creates a deeply tragic feedback loop. The more they push this concern, the more defensive he becomes.
Exactly the case. His defensive, panicked, and sometimes aggressive reactions to their perceived trap only serve to make him appear more erratic to external observers.
Right, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way.
Exactly. When he lashes out or sends massive blocks of text detailing coordinated attacks, he is inadvertently providing them with the exact behavioral evidence they need to validate their claims.
Claims that he requires professional intervention.
Yes. And the truly tragic element here is that Zakir is fully aware of this loop.
He is.
Yeah. He writes to Sindhu, and I'll quote this, my triggers give them more conviction and they think they were right and pushed me further. I went more defensive because I was thinking of this as a trap.
Wow. So he can see the mechanics of the cycle, but the baseline reality of his isolation makes him completely powerless to interrupt it.
Right. He knows he sounds paranoid.
But if the conspiracy is real, paranoia is the only logical survival strategy.
Exactly.
And this brings us to the transition between informal fear and formal law. Because Zakir's anxieties aren't just vague fears of, social stigma.
No, he isn't just worried about people whispering that he's losing his mind.
Right. He is literally quoting sections of the Sin Mental Health Act of 2013 to his friends. He is actively mapping the statutes onto his life.
He's done his homework.
So how does this formal legislation physically allow for the kind of detention he fears? Break that down for us.
Well, if we break down the specific text of the act that Zakir is researching, it reveals the bureaucratic pathway to involuntary admission.
Okay.
The process essentially begins with Section 15.
Section 15, got it.
Under this section, an application for involuntary admission must be presented by a husband, a wife, or what the law defines as the nearest relative.
Nearest relative, okay.
Furthermore, that relative must have personally seen the patient within 14 days of submitting the application.
Okay, let's apply that specifically to Zakir's reality. He looks at Section 15 and realizes that his estranged wife, Sindhu, or his eldest sister, perfectly fit this legal criterion.
They fit it perfectly.
The law requires a nearest relative to pull the trigger, and he is currently at war with his nearest relatives.
Yes. They are the exact mechanism the state requires to initiate his detention.
So the intent of Section 15 is obviously to empower families to intervene when a loved one is in a catastrophic mental health crisis, right? When they can't advocate for themselves.
That's the legislative intent, yes.
But viewed through Zakir's lens, the state has essentially handed a loaded weapon to his adversaries.
That's exactly how he sees it. Once that nearest relative makes the application, the Act outlines two primary routes for involuntary admission.
And what are those routes?
First, there's Section 10. That covers admission for assessment, which allows a person to be detained in a psychiatric facility for up to 28 days.
28 days just for assessment. Wow.
Right. And then there is Section 11, which is admission for treatment.
Okay, and how long is that?
That authorizes detention for up to 6 months with the possibility of renewal.
6 months. So what are the clinical grounds required for those admissions? Because a relative can't just, fill out a form and have you locked away.
No, you're right. Both Section 10 and Section 11 require that the patient is suffering from a mental disorder of a nature or degree that warrants detention for their own health, their own safety, or for the protection of others.
Okay, so there has to be a demonstrated risk.
Yes. But the critical detail Zakir focuses on in his research is the concept of noncompliance.
Noncompliance.
Right. Refusal to adhere to a prescribed medical treatment often serves as the clinical justification that a person is a danger to themselves. If a psychiatrist prescribes medication and you throw it away, a relative can leverage that refusal as evidence that you lack the capacity to care for yourself.
I have to pass here because this logic feels really circular.
How so?
So Zakir isn't officially a psychiatric patient.
Right.
There is no official diagnosis in these chats prior to the events he describes.
Right, there isn't.
So how can a person be legally categorized as non-compliant with a treatment they never sought out or agreed to receive in the first place?
To answer that, we have to examine a highly disturbing incident Zakir recounts to his friend Faizan.
Okay, yeah, let's get into that.
Zakir details what he believes was the precise moment the trap was set. He claims his brothers-in-law approached him with a seemingly benign suggestion.
Okay.
They wanted to take him to Liaquat National Hospital for a routine checkup to address his high blood pressure.
I mean, given the sheer volume of stress we outlined earlier, the financial ruin, the divorce, the caregiving,
Yeah.
high blood pressure is an entirely plausible, even expected medical issue for him to have.
Absolutely.
So agreeing to get it checked sounds like a perfectly reasonable decision.
It is entirely reasonable, which is exactly why Zakir believes it was the perfect bait.
Oh, wow.
However, Zakir alleges that once they arrived at Liaquat National Hospital, the consultation was not with a cardiologist or a general physician.
It wasn't.
No. He claims his brothers-in-law ambushed him by placing him in front of a psychiatrist.
You're kidding.
According to Zakir, after a brief evaluation, this doctor handed him a prescription.
Wait, a psychiatrist prescribed him something for blood pressure.
Well, here's the thing. Zakir says the prescription slip didn't even have his name explicitly written on it.
That's sketchy.
But he recognized the medications. He specifically noted the names Benzodiazepine and Risp,
And what are those?
a heavy anti-anxiety drug and an antipsychotic.
Oh my God, so he went in for a blood pressure cuff and walked out with antipsychotics.
That is his account of the event, yes.
That is insane.
Now, Zakir looked at these medications, understood their pharmacological purpose, and immediately threw them away.
I mean, honestly, who wouldn't?
Right. He absolutely refused to ingest them. And this refusal is the crux of his entire nightmare.
How so?
Well, Zakir outlines a scenario that psychologists refer to as a double bind.
Okay, double bind. Break that down for us.
A double bind occurs when an individual is confronted with two undesirable, mutually exclusive choices,
Right.
and choosing either path results in catastrophic consequences.
Okay, let's dissect the mechanics of this double bind. Because
Okay.
if his analysis is accurate, the mathematical precision of this trap is just incredibly difficult to escape.
It's airtight.
Let's look at the first path. What happens if he complies? What if he just takes the medication?
Okay, if Zakir chooses compliance, he ingests the antipsychotic and anti-anxiety medications.
Right.
But we have to look at the family court battle happening simultaneously.
A custody case with Sindhu.
Exactly.
Right.
His wife has filed a KULA, which is a petition for divorce initiated by the wife.
Okay.
In her legal petition, Zakir states she has formally accused him of substance abuse.
I see where this is going.
Right. The burden of proof in family court for securing sole custody often relies on demonstrating the unfitness of the other parent.
So if he is taking benzodiazepine and RISP, how does that affect his custody case?
Zakir fears that taking prescribed psychiatric medication will trigger a false positive on a court-ordered drug screening.
Oh, wow.
He specifically mentions a fear of the medications registering as an LSD false positive.
LSD, is that even scientifically accurate?
Well, that might be a layman's misunderstanding of how specific psychiatric drugs interact with toxicology screens.
Right, but the underlying legal fear is completely valid.
Exactly. If he takes the pills, his tox screen comes back positive for mind-altering substances.
He basically hands his wife the empirical clinical proof she needs to validate her substance abuse allegations.
Yes. He loses the family court case, and he loses his children.
That is devastating. So that is the penalty for compliance. You take the medicine, you lose your kids.
Right.
So what is the penalty for the second path? What happens if he does exactly what he did and refuses the medication?
Well, if he throws the pills away, his biological system remains clean.
Right, so he can pass the toxicology screen and defend himself against the substance abuse allegation.
Yes. However, by discarding the medication, he triggers the mental health trap.
The non-compliance.
Exactly. His family can now approach the authorities and invoke the Sin Mental Health Act.
Oh, man.
They can point to the consultation at Liaquat National Hospital and say, look, a medical professional prescribed him antipsychotics, and he is a non-compliant patient.
They can say he is refusing his medication, he's exhibiting extreme paranoia regarding his family.
And he's currently the sole caregiver for two young children.
Wow.
He poses an immediate risk. This narrative provides the exact clinical justification needed for forced institutionalization under Section 10 or 11.
He is literally trapped between two distinct legal systems.
He really is.
The family court requires him to be chemically clean to prove he is a fit father.
Right.
But the mental health system requires him to be chemically compliant to prove he is a sane citizen.
It's perfect catch-22.
But wait, the Sin Mental Health Act cannot simply allow a relative to lock someone away based on one refused prescription, right? Like, what are the formal medical safeguards built into this law?
Okay, so the primary safeguard against malicious institutionalization is the requirement of medical verification.
Meaning doctors have to sign off.
Yes. The Act mandates that an application for involuntary admission under Section 10 or 11 must be founded on the written recommendations of two separate independent medical practitioners.
Two independent doctors.
Okay. Furthermore, there is a requirement for specialist oversight. At least one of those two doctors must be an approved psychiatrist.
That makes sense.
And they are required to formally document why community care or voluntary outpatient treatment is not appropriate for the patient.
This highlights the absolute tragedy of Zakir's perspective, because the law was meticulously drafted to ensure objectivity.
It was.
Requiring two independent doctors, including a specialist, is supposed to be the ultimate firewall against a vindictive spouse or a greedy sibling.
Exactly. It's designed to stop exactly what he's afraid of.
But to Zakir, that firewall doesn't exist. He literally tells his friend in the chats, I know they are already in on the trap.
Right.
When you believe your family has successfully stolen your mother's power of attorney and seamlessly ambushed you at a major hospital, two doctors don't represent a medical safeguard.
No, they just represent two more individuals your family needs to manipulate, bribe, or deceive.
Exactly. The institutional protections that are built on the presumption of medical objectivity, they just feel completely hollow to a man who believes the entire ecosystem is compromised.
And that feeling of the safeguards being hollow turns into sheer panic when we introduce the element of time.
Right, because this isn't just an abstract threat.
No. The standard procedures for Section 10 and 11 take time to process. But Zakir is watching a very specific, rapidly approaching deadline.
The family court date.
Yes.
The sources show him agonizing over this impending hearing for the interim custody of Zainab and Zar.
Right.
He views this court date as the exact moment the trap will spring. So how does this specific timeline intersect with the mental health legislation?
To understand the threat of the court date, we have to examine Section 12 of the Sin Mental Health Act.
Okay, Section 12, what is that?
Section 12 is the provision for urgent admission.
Urgent admission. That sounds bad.
In situations that the law categorizes as an urgent necessity, the standard procedural safeguards are bypassed entirely. Yes, a relative can apply for an immediate 72-hour detention based on the medical recommendation of just one practitioner.
Wow. That drastically lowers the barrier to entry. You don't need the consensus of two doctors, you just need one signature.
Exactly. It accelerates the process exponentially. And the threat is compounded by Section 19 of the Act.
What does Section 19 do?
Section 19 authorizes direct police intervention.
Oh boy.
If an individual is found in a public place and is perceived to be in immediate need of care or control, a police officer possesses the authority to physically remove that person to a place of safety.
Like a psychiatric facility.
Exactly, for up to 72 hours for an urgent examination.
Okay, so let's map Section 12 and Section 19 onto Zakir's impending court hearing. How does he visualize these statutes being deployed against him?
Zakir constructs a highly specific, synchronized nightmare scenario in his messages, particularly to a contact named Fatima. Because his son Zar is sick with chickenpox, Zakir is tethered to his home. He predicts that the family court judge, whom he already suspects of being biased against fathers in custody disputes, will rule ex parte.
And an ex parte ruling means the judge will make a decision in Zakir's absence, right?
Yes, inevitably granting interim custody to his ex-wife.
The moment that ruling is signed, the police are dispatched to his residence to physically enforce the court order. They're coming to take the children.
Precisely, and this is the exact moment Zakir is dreading.
Right.
He anticipates that when the police arrive at his door, his children will be crying and confused, and he will naturally be in a state of extreme emotional distress.
Of course he would be.
And he believes his relatives will be waiting in the wings to simultaneously trigger Section 12.
Oh my God. They use the custody transfer as a smokescreen for a psychiatric ambush.
That is his fear. Under the guise that Zakir is a known, non-compliant psychiatric patient who is now suffering a massive, visible emotional collapse due to the physical removal of his children.
His family will frame his natural grief and resistance as a dangerous psychiatric emergency.
Yes. He envisions a scenario where the mental health authorities invoke urgent necessity, throwing him into an ambulance at the exact same moment his wife takes his children away in a police cruiser.
It is a flawlessly synchronized, legally sanctioned removal from society.
It really is.
In the chats, Zakir compares his existence to living inside a horror movie. And honestly, when you analyze the legal mechanics of how easily a custody dispute could theoretically be weaponized into an urgent psychiatric detention, the horror movie comparison feels chillingly accurate.
It does. But the terror doesn't stop at the ambulance door.
Right. What are the specific consequences Zakir fears once he's actually admitted to a facility?
Zakir has clearly analyzed the full scope of the act, and his terror is fixated on the sweeping powers granted to a legally appointed guardian once a patient is deemed incompetent.
Okay, what kind of powers?
He points out that under the law, a guardian possesses the authority to consent to severe, irreversible medical interventions on behalf of the patient.
Without the patient's consent?
Yes. This explicitly includes electroconvulsive therapy, or ECT, which can be administered with or without anesthesia.
Wow. The concept of your estranged spouse or a hostile sibling having the legal authority to authorize shock therapy on your brain is just unfathomable.
He also notes that the guardian can approve inclusion in experimental psychiatric programs.
Experimental programs.
Yes. He literally writes that he fears his mind will be completely finished.
That is grim.
But the erasure he fears isn't solely cognitive or physical, it is profoundly financial.
Right. We mentioned earlier that they were choking his resources.
Zakir highlights a bureaucratic reality within the law. Within 90 days of his commitment, his newly appointed guardian could legally begin liquidating his assets.
So the guardian would completely control his property. They could sell the very house he is currently barricaded inside.
They could sell the real estate, empty any remaining bank accounts, and, as Zakir vividly describes, disappear with the money and my children.
Man, When you look at the totality of these fears, Zakir isn't just facing a divorce or a brief hospital stay.
No, he hasn't.
He is staring down the legally sanctioned systematic erasure of his entire existence.
Yes.
His identity as a father is severed. His physical autonomy is revoked. His cognitive function is at the mercy of experimental treatments. And his property is legally transferred to the very individuals he believes orchestrated his downfall.
It's a complete wipeout.
If the threat is that absolute, and Zakir understands the legal architecture of this trap so intimately, how does he plan to survive?
Yeah.
Like, what defense mechanisms are actually available to him? Let's transition to the concept of safeguards, survival, and what we're calling the illusion of protection.
Okay, to evaluate his defense strategy, we must first look at the primary legal shield designed to protect citizens from this exact scenario.
Okay, what is that shield?
Within the Sin Mental Health Act, the ultimate deterrent against malicious relatives is Section 52, subsection 1.
Section 52(1). How does that function as a shield?
The statute states that any individual who willfully makes a false entry or a false statement with the explicit intent to have someone detained under the act is guilty of an offense.
Okay, so it's a crime to lie to get someone committed.
Yes. It carries tangible, severe penalties. It is punishable by up to 1 year in prison, a significant fine, or both.
Right.
It is designed to make the cost of a false accusation higher than the potential reward of stealing someone's property.
Okay, I need to push back on this because it seems like the obvious solution to his entire nightmare.
Okay, go ahead.
If Section 52(1) exists, and Zakir possesses a phone full of WhatsApp logs demonstrating his wife's strategy, texts proving his siblings are choking his finances, and documentation of the ambush at the hospital, why doesn't he simply walk into the family court, present this digital evidence to the judge, point to Section 52(1), and demand that his family be prosecuted for conspiracy?
Right. It is the most logical question to ask.
It seems so obvious.
But it fundamentally ignores the sociological and economic realities of the justice system.
How so?
Formal laws like Section 52(1) are not self-executing. They require a user to activate them.
Right, you have to bring the case.
And activating the justice system requires 3 crucial assets: resources, credibility, and representation. Zakir's informal reality is that he has been systematically stripped of all 3.
Okay, let's break those down, starting with the economic reality.
Right.
Resources. The justice system is essentially a pay-to-play arena, right?
Exactly. Zakir is financially starved. We established that his siblings control his mother's wealth and his own accounts are depleted.
He's crowdsourcing $10 in cryptocurrency just to navigate the week.
Right. You cannot mount an aggressive legal defense, hire forensic data experts to authenticate WhatsApp chat logs for a judge, and initiate a countersuit for malicious intent when you do not possess the capital to purchase groceries for your sick child.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
Ah.
The legal shield exists, but it is locked behind a paywall he just cannot access.
Exactly.
And even if he found a pro bono lawyer or represented himself, he runs into the second deficit, credibility.
Yes. The weaponization of mental health allegations is incredibly insidious because it attacks the very foundation of a person's credibility.
Zakir is acutely aware that any accusation he makes in court will instantly be filtered through the lens of a man who is already suspected of suffering from a severe psychiatric disorder.
Exactly. He laments to his friend Fatima that in the environment of family courts, even hard video evidence is routinely dismissed.
Wow.
Imagine Zakir standing before a judge, passionately outlining a sprawling conspiracy involving his estranged wife, his siblings, his in-laws, and the psychiatric department of Liaquat National Hospital.
Right.
How does that narrative sound to an overworked judge?
It sounds exactly like the paranoid delusions his wife is alleging he suffers from.
Yes.
The harder he tries to expose the mechanics of the trap, the more erratic and unstable he appears. The attempt to prove his sanity becomes the exact evidence used to confirm his insanity.
It is a devastating catch-22.
It really is.
And this brings us to the final deficit: representation.
Right. Lawyers.
To navigate a catch-22 of that magnitude, you need legal counsel you trust implicitly. But the chats reveal Zakir deeply mistrusts his own lawyer.
Really?
He refers to his attorney as a liar. He alleges that his lawyer is actively hiding critical case files from him and providing strategies designed to fail.
He thinks his own lawyer is in on it.
Yes. He even harbors suspicions that the attorney is operating as a double agent, secretly colluding with his hostile sisters.
Wow. When you believe the guide you hired to lead you through the legal labyrinth is actively steering you toward the Minotaur, the formal protections of the law just cease to exist.
They absolutely do.
So Section 52(1) is a ghost.
Essentially, yes.
The formal legal system offers him no protection because he lacks the resources to access it, the credibility to wield it, and the representation to navigate it.
Exactly.
So if he cannot rely on the law, what is his actual strategy for survival?
Because the formal avenues are blocked, Zakir resorts entirely to informal guerrilla survival tactics.
Okay, what does that look like?
His strategy is based on absolute risk mitigation. First, he enacts a policy of total physical avoidance regarding his ex-wife.
Avoidance.
When she requests a meeting, he outright refuses, or he insists the meeting occur in a highly public space.
Why?
He does this to prevent her from observing, provoking, or recording any out-of-context emotional reactions that she could later present to a doctor or a judge as evidence of instability.
So he is auditing his own emotional output at a microscopic level.
Yes. Second, he maintains absolute biological discipline.
Meaning no meds.
Right. He refuses to ingest any medication, regardless of the physical or mental toll the stress is taking on him, to ensure his toxicology reports remain unimpeachable for the family court.
Wow.
Third, and this is perhaps his most desperate calculation, he deliberately chooses to skip his court dates.
Wait, he intentionally defaults on the interim custody hearing?
Yes.
But he loses the kids if he does that.
He calculates that absorbing a temporary legal defeat, allowing the judge to rule ex parte against him, is a safer outcome than walking into the physical perimeter of the courthouse.
Because he thinks the Section 12 psychiatric ambush is waiting for him there?
Exactly. He sacrifices legal ground to preserve his physical freedom.
That's just bleak.
Mhm.
And finally, there is a digital component to his survival strategy, right?
Yes. He recognizes that he might fail. He might get taken.
Right.
So he focuses on preserving the truth if he is taken. He continuously asks friends like Faizan and Fatima to back up his audio recordings, his videos, and his chat logs.
He mentions uploading materials to YouTube, doesn't he?
He does. He is meticulously constructing a digital dead man's switch.
A dead man switch.
His rationale is that if the ambulance doors close and he disappears into a locked ward, he wants the empirical evidence of this conspiracy distributed to the world to expose the people who put him there.
Wow. Every single action he takes, from avoiding a simple text message to backing up a file, is dictated by the urgent need to survive a legal apparatus he believes is hunting him.
Every waking moment.
When we pull back and look at the entirety of this deep dive, the profound tragedy woven through these sources is undeniable.
It really is.
I mean, the Sin Mental Health Act of 2013 was drafted by legislators with the noblest of intentions, right? It was designed to provide vital, life-saving medical intervention to vulnerable citizens who cannot care for themselves and to protect society at large.
Right.
Yet, when filtered through the reality of Khan Zakir, a man backed into a corner by a bitter divorce, absolute financial starvation, and what he perceives as a catastrophic familial betrayal, that exact same legislation undergoes a terrifying transformation.
It completely shifts.
It ceases to be a shield of medical care and becomes a perfectly calibrated weapon of destruction.
Yes.
It becomes a legal, state-sanctioned mechanism to seamlessly steal his children, liquidate his property, and just erase his autonomy.
And Zakir's reality forces us to confront an assumption that most of us make every single day.
What's that?
Well, we navigate our lives assuming the objectivity of the systems built around us.
Right.
We assume that the law is a neutral arbiter. We assume that if we know we are sane, the medical and legal establishments will naturally recognize and validate that sanity.
They just take it for granted.
But this story exposes the terrifying fragility of that assumption. It demands that you, listening to this, ask yourself, how easily could standard legal and medical procedures be weaponized against you if your entire support system suddenly aligned against you?
That is a scary thought.
When the very people the law trusts to advocate for your well-being are the ones documenting your demise, how do you mathematically prove your own sanity to a stranger holding a clipboard?
It is a profoundly unsettling reality to consider. And it leads me to one final provocative question for you to mull over as we conclude this deep dive. Think about Zakir's daily existence right now. He spends every waking hour anticipating legal traps.
Every hour.
He is analyzing dense statutory frameworks in the middle of the night. He is avoiding his family, screening his communications, and living in a state of extreme, hyper-vigilant isolation.
Right.
If a perfectly sane person successfully dodges a mental health system they believe is hunting them, does the extreme paranoia, the relentless exhaustion, and the profound isolation required to survive that evasion ultimately create the very mental instability the system was originally deployed to treat.
That is the ultimate paradox of his survival. The cure becomes the cause.
We began this conversation by asking how you defend yourself when the allegation is that your mind is broken.
Yeah.
When you look at the diagnostic landscape of human behavior and you introduce the blunt, overwhelming force of the legal system into a family dispute, the system doesn't just evaluate the fractures in a person's life.
No, it doesn't.
It actively creates the very fractures it is supposed to be looking for.